What is up, everyone? I am TST's the Mudman, and it's time to figure out what we are going to do this weekend in Gods Unchained. So we are on gudex.com. We're looking at God popularity and mythic rank over the past 7 days. And as you can see, we've got War, Nature, and Light in the top 3 slots, followed by Magic, Deception, and Death taking up the rear. And before we talk about the most common archetypes, let's dive a little bit deeper into the god popularity. As you can see, Light currently has the highest win rate out of all the gods, generally speaking, and they're the third most popular god over the past 7 days. But if we tighten up the search to the last 3 days, we can see that Light is the most popular god, 2% more popular than Nature, and we can see that Nature and War are going to be roughly the same throughout all this data. And then if we go even further to just 1 day at Mythic rank, we can see that Light's popularity is continuing to jump. With each passing day, Light seems to be getting more and more popular, which makes a lot of sense considering the reason Light is so good is mainly based off of these great new core set refresh cards, which people are unlocking every single day so they can make these very powerful Light decks. So despite the fact that the current popularity in Mythic rank is War, Nature, then Light, it's probably reasonable to extrapolate that Light will be either the second or maybe even the most popular god over the weekend ranked event. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about each god and what their most likely archetype is that you'll be seeing over the weekend. War is primarily aggressive. They always use the Slayer god power. The aggressive Slayer decks can go like one of two ways. They can either be very relic oriented and run cards like I Need a Weapon and Sharpens and Whetstones to really capitalize on their relics, or they can be more spell buff oriented with Red Fume Serums and Another Rounds and sometimes even Overproof Brews. But either way, Aggressive War is really strong. It's very capable of dealing with Light, and Light is currently the best god in the game, so you've always got to be thinking about your Light matchups. Nature is the same aggressive, mid-range leaning towards aggressive Nature deck that you're used to seeing. There's a bit of mid-range leaning towards control Nature decks floating around, but the aggressive variant is definitely more common. Light is always creature-oriented. It's going to be some variation of mid-range, whether it stops at 5 mana or it goes all the way up to 7 mana with Zealous March, but no matter what Light deck you see, they're always going to be creature-oriented. Magic is a bit up in the air. There is the Dralamir combo magic, which is very strong, but not particularly common. Tempo magic is not great in the meta currently. It was a great deck, before the core set refresh, and then, it was a fantastic deck right after, but they nerfed a whole bunch of the cards that made Magic better, and the core set refresh empowered a whole bunch of existing archetypes, and with those nerfs from 2 weeks ago, Magic is pretty much the same as it was pre-core set refresh, so it is no longer worth playing. Deception is not particularly popular, and you can see here Deception in general has a fairly low win rate at 48%. However, Hidden Rush Deception is a very strong archetype right now, and you'll probably be seeing a pretty fair amount of Hidden Rush Deception over the weekend. And then we've got Death at the bottom of the barrel. Death is in a very awkward spot at the moment. Currently, I would say that Board Wipe Death is still probably the best Death archetype. However, Death has been so weak this past week that Zombie Death is encroaching on Board Wipe Death in general goodness, but the fact of the matter is you're probably not going to see too much Death over the weekend ranked event. So now that we have discussed the meta in a general sense, let's jump into some specific deck lists. Alright, so let's start things off with the strongest god in Light. Last weekend, 2 different Light decks went 24 out of 25, and this list made by Hisoka is one of them. Don't be confused by GU deck's classification of Control Light. This is a very mid-rangey deck. You can tell by the curve. Just got strong creatures all the way up to 7. And this just seems like a very tight Light list. You've got great cards, in the early game. You have your Netherborn Binder, your Drider Sailweaver, Vanguard Axewoman, Pyramid Wardens, which are Vexing Vicar, obviously, which are all really great targets to be buffed with your Shield Bearers as well as your fellow Janissaries. Of course, we got 2 copies of the Mace of Calling, a new core set refresh Light card. It's really, really strong. It should be able to destroy like 3 of your opponent's creatures, sorry, as well as generate you a 2/2 Acolyte that you can use for even more tempo. He's got 2 Militant Theists in the deck, which are also new, and just like Shield Bearer and Fellow Janissary, it can also buff up your creatures. Light always has great creatures, but this card has like a little flexibility bonus, where it can give an opposing creature -1/-1, which could be great for trading, and or Light's levying opponents. However, this Light deck does not run any Light's levies, which is very interesting. Clearly, it doesn't need Light's levies. Hisoka here has played 26 games with a 96% win rate, so apparently Wrong Pass is just enough, like powerful 3-mana spells. But if you wanted to figure out a way to slot in some Light's levies into this deck, I can't imagine it hurting. We got Highborn Knight, super good card. Cern, also obvious, got the Prayer of the Desperate, another new core set refresh card. 5 mana, give all your creatures +2/+2, no prerequisites, just buff all the stuff. It is super strong, turns your board full of little tiny 2-attack creatures into 4-attack creatures, and 4-attack creatures are scary. Let's see, then we got Asterius, does the exact same thing as Prayer of the Desperate, but costs 1 more mana and has a body. And then, of course, we have Zealous March, 2 copies of Zealous March, the only 7-mana card that Light would ever even think about running. Fills your entire board up with 2/2 Acolytes and gives your creatures protected. So, if you do have creatures on the board, and you don't get the full 6 2/2s, it will protect whatever creature you have floating around on the board. Let's see, in the neutral slots, we already talked about the Netherborn Binders, the Ashlyman, and the Pyramid Warden. We have the Minosian Infiltrators, which is really good in the mirror match to attack your opposing Pyramid Wardens. Also just a decent 2-mana card. Light wants lots of cheap creatures for them to buff, obviously, so Minosian Infiltrator is just strong tempo choice in general. And of course we have Porphyrion, who is incredibly strong post-core set refresh. Light really loves having warded creatures, but realistically, pretty much every deck should probably put Porphyrion in the deck and then only remove it if you have a great excuse to remove it, because Porphyrion is just an amazing card. But yeah, essentially speaking, this is just a very dominant, zoo-style deck. The creatures are very hard to remove. Light can capitalize on their creatures very easily, and then just go face efficiently, make great value trades. If you've got the collection to make a great Light deck, then Light's the strongest god right now, and it is definitely a great choice to play this weekend. Okay, and now let's move on to Aggro War. This Aggro War list was made by Dutch Masters. And this aggressive war list utilizes both relics and relic buffs, as well as Vikings and Viking synergies. And I am a big fan of this aggressive war list for this current meta. Just like I said last week, I think the relic variation of aggressive war is better because there's so much light. When you're playing against light opponents, you have to be removing their creatures every single turn, and if you can use your face to trade away a creature instead of your creatures to trade away creatures, then it's plus points for you. But in that same vein of playing against light is notoriously bad at dealing with wide boards, and the Viking-themed aggressive war decks tend to go wider than your average aggressive war decks. Looking at cards like Viking War Maiden that makes, a little 1/1 brawler, as well as a Bloodguard that has the afterlife effect of getting more creatures. Let's see, Dutch Masters also has a Foolhardy Berserker in here to capitalize on some of his early game Vikings. This card has not really seen play in a very long time, so let's go over him a bit. This is a 2-mana 3/2, and after this creature deals damage, give a random friendly Viking +2 strength. So if this attacks a god, its ability activates. If this attacks a creature, its ability activates. And if a creature attacks this creature, its ability will activate. So when you are playing against Foolhardy Berserkers, you have to be cognizant to deal with the Berserker first and then trade other things away, or the Berserker will buff, those subsequent creatures. Let's see, but let's go over some of the relic stuff, because like I said, the relics are very strong in this current meta. There is not a single copy of I Need a Weapon in this deck. However, the majority of the weapons are creature weapons. Got 2 copies of Leviathan Hunter to generate you a Barbed Hook. Got the Valka's Captain Relic. Then, of course, we've got 2 copies of Blade of Styx, as well as the Enduring Shield for favorable trades. I've got a fair amount of Blitz creatures in here. Obviously, got the Vanguard Axewoman, as well as the Tavern Brawlers, which are great for dealing with your opposing aggressive opponents. And the meta is pretty aggressive at the moment, especially with light. We also have a copy of Viking Longship for even more blitz trade action. Let's see, as like an endgame win con type thing, Dutch Masters can choose between using a Red Fume Serum to buff up one of his creatures, into a big beat stick and dealing a ton of damage, or he can use Sharpen to power up his Blade of Sticks as well as whatever creature he has on the board to do lots of damage. So in conclusion, I think the relics as well as the going wide nature of this deck will be really important for all the light matchups, which I think will be pretty prevalent this weekend. And when he doesn't play against, or when anyone piloting this deck doesn't play against light, you are capable of being extremely aggressive. You have your relics, you have your battle bard to increase the power of your Vikings, your foolhardy berserkers increase the power of your Vikings. Many of your Vikings have protected as well. We've got the 2 copies of Master Tactician, as well as the Adi. So when these creatures get buffed, they're very hard to remove. So when you're playing against not light, you're capable of being incredibly fast and just overwhelming your opponent quickly. And when you're playing against light, you're capable of stymieing their board state very effectively as well while creating your own board state. So Aggressive War seems like a pretty great archetype in this current meta. I would definitely recommend playing some sort of Aggressive War deck like this, and it'll be fun, explosive, and incredibly quick if you select this deck for your weekend ranked run. Timeout. I'm editing the video right now, and I'm realizing that I said the foolhardy berserker thing backwards. And if you do it the way I said it, it's a big deal. So I said when you're playing against foolhardy berserker, you have to kill the berserker first, and that's wrong. If you do that, that's wrong. First, you have to get rid of all the other Vikings, and then the foolhardy berserker. That way, his ability won't activate. And yeah, so sorry about that. Carry on. All right, now let's talk about nature. This mid-range nature deck was made by Aftermath Arachnid. It is a fairly standard mid-range nature deck. It looks very similar to something that we would see pre-core set refresh. And the composition of the list, I think, is pretty interesting. If you would have asked me, before making this video, what I thought like the best nature list would look like for this weekend ranked event, I would think something with a very low curve, like maybe with like 2 giant penguins on the top end, maybe just topping out at 5. But Aftermath and people like Suli who've been playing this deck list have proven that the higher curve nature is being very successful, and it makes a decent amount of sense. A lot of like I said, this list looks similar to the old nature list, but a lot of the cards have been buffed up. You can see we have the new and improved Staff of Roots, which is now a 3-mana 2/2 relic. Still has Twin Strike and Blitz, and now it has Roar, Summon a Walking Plant if you control a wild creature. And considering like 90% of nature's creatures are wild, you'll probably be able to meet that prerequisite. Let's see, we talk about the Veil Warden Minotaur every week because I think he is so cool. 5 mana, 5/5, Afterlife, heal your god for 3, and add a random 7 mana wild creature to your hand. 7 mana wild creatures, even the worst ones, aren't that bad. Having a free 7 mana creature to play is really great, and not drawing it until after you played your Veil Warden Minotaur is even better. I'm not going to go through the entire list just because we've talked about very similar nature lists pretty much every week for 19 weeks straight. But I would like to discuss the Sage of Renewal. I think this card is really interesting. Obviously, we all remember that 1 week of Sage of Renewal being completely busted. It has been toned down a bit. It now has, it's still a 7 mana 6/6 with regen 2. However, now it refreshes 2 mana, and you delve 2 mana's worth of nature spells. It's definitely going to have a hard time competing with cards like Zealous March at 7 mana, but pretty much every card has a hard time competing with Zealous March at 7 mana. But it seems like this deck is pretty strong all throughout the curve, and it's versatile. It can be very aggressive, like if this deck is the faster deck, it can play its Black Jaguars, it can play its Marshwalkers, its Wild Hogs, Celestial Stags for pressure, and if it needs to be, if it needs to like take a step back and be the reactive deck, it has the Fey Flame Blades, it has that Staff Roots we mentioned, the Lightning Strikes, which are quite powerful. Falling Star is a great like control tempo tool. Wildfire can be used defensively or offensively, depending on how you want to look at it. Just all in all, this deck seems like very, very solid. I know a lot of people love playing nature, and this list has been quite successful. As you can see, 200 games have been played at the time of recording this video with an even 70% win rate. That is well above average This is the type of deck that you can definitely expect good results with if you run it during the weekend ranked event. The next archetype I'd like to go over is Hidden Rush Deception. This particular Hidden Rush list was made by Apollo, and I am a big fan of the Hidden Rush Deception archetype for this current weekend ranked event. Aggressive Deception has historically been really good against Light because Light has a very difficult time interacting with hidden creatures, and Deception has access to a lot of hidden creatures. And then just besides that, this is just a strong deck in general with strong stuff going on all throughout the curve. We have really powerful early game plays. You got your Patient Pickpocket alongside the Hollow combo. You got your Shadow of Lethanons, obviously, which are very hard to remove, especially for Light. They can be paired with Dark Knives for just devastating amounts of damage. We've got a copy of Makeshift Shivan here, which I think is pretty good in the meta right now. Light has a lot of protected stuff. War has a lot of protected stuff. Makeshift Shiv is really good for popping protecteds, and War and Light are some of the more popular gods in the meta currently. Orfeo is just a very high tempo tool. It's great for an early game trade. It's great for just being a bonus body when you're playing against nature, and nature's pretty popular. But Orfeo is pretty high upside. It's going to get a pretty great trade up at some point in the game. Let's see, you got the Stone Skin Poisons, which is just great. 1 mana, control card. It goes through Ward. There's a lot of Ward floating around with Light being so popular. Switch Duelist, just, Deception staple. Good all the time. Same thing can be said with Armor Lurker. The Hollow is also obvious. The Hollow is in every single Deception deck because it just gets you resources for days. It has Ward. It has Order. It's hard to deal with. Let's see, we got Lady Marcella in here. Lady Marcella, similar to Orfeo, makes deadly creatures. Deadly creatures are great for controlling the board, and you are an aggressive deck, so controlling the board is decent, so your creatures can live. Then we got Ludia's Dedicant in here. Ludia's Dedicant is another Deception staple. It's just really good. Blessed is decent in the early game. 3/3 bodies, fairly threatening. Your God Power Orfeo's Distraction is really useful, so you'll probably be using it most turns anyway, so you can just capitalize on the Decadent being on the board and getting lots of bonus cards from your opponent. Got the Volt Vagabond in here, which, very similar to the Dedicant above, just gets you resources from your opponent's deck. It's very useful. Now that it's been buffed up to a 3/3 post-Core refresh, it's far more threatening than it used to be. We've got Avatar in here just because it's a very decent creature. 4 mana 4/4 is pretty strong. Hidden makes it hard to remove. It turns off a creature for a turn and leaves it confused forever, which is super strong. I got 2 copies of Rapture Dance in here, which I think is another great call for the meta currently. Things are very aggressive right now. Light, obviously, being the strongest god. Light goes wide all the time. War tends to go fairly wide, especially if these Viking War decks are going to become more popular. Viking War going wider than normal aggressive War. And then, of course, you have Nature that runs things like Blade Flies and Falling Stars, so they always go wide. So 2 copies of Rapture Dance, very strong in this current meta. In the neutral slots, of course, we have Pyramid Warden, because this is a God's Unchained deck. And we have 2 copies of the Fermentari Instigator, which I am a big fan of. Apollo doesn't have any Desert Mercenaries in here, which makes sense because there are very few 3-mana guild creatures. However, there are a lot of guild creatures, many of which being hidden or ordered so they stick around, and then you can draw more of your resources, which is always great for an aggressive deck, so you can just spill and refill. We've got Guild Enforcer in here. Guild Enforcer is obviously a strong card on its own, pairing it with Dark Knives and then using Orfeo's Distractions, win condition, blah blah blah. I say that all the time, but right now, Guild Enforcer is particularly good in the meta because it's a neutral card, and it's really hard for Light to deal with. They can't Light's Levy it, obviously. Imperious Smite is not common and probably won't be able to kill a Guild Enforcer anyway. So the way your Light opponents will usually be destroying your Guild Enforcer is with maybe up to 5 Acolytes, which is really devastating for them. They can try to destroy it with something like a Master of Indulgence, but if they Master of Indulgence this, it still takes 2 Acolytes or an Acolyte and a Relic Charge to get through. The fact of the matter is, Guild Enforcer is really hard for Light to deal with, and Light is going to be very prevalent. And then, of course, we have Porphyrion in here, because Apollo seems to agree with me that Porphyrion is just the best 5-mana card, so you put it in your deck. But, Aggressive Deception seems like a great choice in the meta right now. It's pretty strong against Light. It's really strong against everything else. It's fun. It's fast. The random generated cards from the Hollow, the Vagabond, and the Dedicant make each game feel fresh and exciting. So if you want to have fun, do well, win fast, Hidden Rush Deception could be the list for you. And now let's move on to Magic. Before we talk about this deck or this archetype or anything, let's address the elephant in the room. The best Magic archetype currently is the Dralamir combo deck, and this is clearly not the Dralamir combo deck. So what's the deal? Well, they've announced the way Dralamir currently interacts with mana is bugged, and the Dralamir combo deck relies on using that bug for the combo. So if you play that deck over the weekend, you are technically exploiting a bug, which is against the rules. So, Gods Unchained could disqualify you for exploiting bugs if they really wanted to. Like, that being said, I'm not your dad. If you want to play Dralamir Magic over the weekend, go for it. But you're going to have to find your own list. But there are other archetypes for Magic. Cobalt Chieftain over here has been playing Control Magic fairly successfully. Most everyone is playing the Dralamir Magic if they're playing Magic, so it was quite difficult to find any other successful Magic deck, but Cobalt has managed to make a fairly powerful Control deck. Control Magic is pretty good in the meta currently. Light is known for having lots of wards, so you might think that using spells to control the board could be difficult. However, Magic has so much AoE that they can deal with ward fairly effectively, and they always have their trusty Mage Bolt God Power in order to ping some ward away. Let's go over some of the more interesting cards in this deck for your control tools, which are the most important aspects, seeing as this is Control Magic. We, of course, have the bolts in Star Shard Bolt as well as Tracking Bolt. We also have Time Bomb, who has been modified post-core set refresh. It is still a 2-mana 3/2, but now it has Afterlife, deal 2 damage to the weakest enemy creature. So this is an extremely high-tempo 2-mana card. The Time Bomb himself can trade away a creature, and then his Afterlife can destroy another creature. So Time Bomb is effectively a 2-for-1. So that is a really great thing to have for any control deck. We've got the Corrales Rune Moth, which is difficult to deal with. It makes 0-mana runes. 0-mana runes are good, no matter which one you get. Even the Healing Rune, for a slow control deck like this, is great for stalling. Obviously, 0-mana Runes of Fire and Strength are completely broken, and drawing a card and foreseeing 2 for 0 mana is also pretty busted. So Corrales Rune Moth just, at this point is becoming a Magic staple you put in all your decks. Now we have Lightning Talisman, which is a Magic relic that has not seen a ton of play, not because it's bad, just because Magic has so many relics, and a lot of the relics don't go away, so Lightning Talisman's had a hard time, finding a place to shine. However, it's really strong in this current meta. After your god is damaged, deal 2 damage to the strongest enemy creature and 1 damage to the other weaker enemy creature, and this loses 1 durability. So this essentially is 3 mana that deals 9 damage over the course of many different bodies, which is really great for dealing with light because they go very wide. Like I said before, nature goes wide, war is aggressive and goes pretty wide. So Lightning Talisman is a great way to, for one card to mitigate your opponent's board state over multiple turns. And one thing that's important to note, it may not come up that often, but if it's your turn and you'd like to activate your Lightning Talisman, you can always God Power your own face to proc the relic, which is kind of cool. Let's see, we've got Shape Blast, just more of that great AoE to deal with your war, light, nature opponent's boards. We've got the Stormstress, which is another card that has been buffed in the core set refresh. It is a 5-mana 3/6 with frontline and roar deal 1 damage to each enemy creature. So it's like a little weak AoE board clear, and then just an annoying frontline body for your opponent to deal with. Now we have Archimedes' Mirror, which is it's a creature, but it qualifies as another AoE board clear. This is really strong in the meta right now. It's interesting because Archimedes' Mirror is probably the best card to deal with something like Zealous March, because you can, play your AoE board clear, the AoE pops all the bubbles, the protected bubbles of the Zealous March, and then the Archimedes' Mirror getting hit by your AoE will deal more damage to those Zealous Marchers, clearing them off. However, this is a 1-attack creature, which means it can be Lights Levied. So if you're playing a control Magic deck like this, I definitely recommend having 2 Archimedes' Mirrors, but you're going to want to be cognizant of your light opponent's Lights Levies, maybe try to bait them out early with some Rune Moths, maybe with, a Diligent Architect or the Relics Diligent Architect delves. But yeah, this is a really powerful card. for dealing with life, for dealing with any board state, but this is one of the few cards that you can use to deal with the Zealous March, and that is very valuable in this current meta. Then we have Cersei, keeping the AoE clear train going, another great clear card. And this one is interesting because it's incredibly powerful with Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is a pseudo win con for this deck. You can pair, Metamorphosis with any of your high mana creatures in order for a huge tempo swing. So you can play the Cersei, deal 3 damage to your opponent's everything, set up your next 3 draws, and then turn it into maybe a Healing Elite, maybe a Jotun, who knows what. But Metamorphosis makes for some huge tempo swings, and Cersei is a prime target for it. But since we are on Metamorphosis, let's keep talking about that. You don't need to only play Metamorphosis in the late game. If, a creature like your Stormstress gets a good value trade, you can always metamorphosize that. If your opponent has a dangerous creature, you can target an opposing creature and then just pick the worst card, that you delve off the Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is not only incredibly powerful offensively, but, it can be used defensively in a pinch. And for only 1 mana, getting rid of your, opponent's like big high threat creature is very powerful. And that moves us into the neutral slots. We've got the Iron-Tooth Goblin. Relics are fairly prevalent in the meta. Light obviously runs relics. Death is less popular than ever, but all the death decks run relics. Magic always runs relics. This one even runs the Talisman. So relic removal is pretty good in the meta right now. However, right now you kind of have to use Iron-Tooth Goblin. The other bits of relic removal are less valuable because Light's most prevalent relic has 3 durability. Light's going to be very popular, and you're going to want to be able to take all the durability off of their maces. So if you're throwing relic removal into your decks, it's got to be the Iron-Tooth this week. Let's see, then we've also got the Diligent Architect in here, which is a very interesting inclusion. The more I think about it, the more I like it. So you play your Diligent Architect, you delve your structures. Structures usually have frontline. Out of the 3 you get to choose from, you'll definitely be able to find one with frontline. And maybe even high roll and get one of the broken legendary ones. And those, health buffed frontline creatures will help sustain you so you can make it to your end game. We've got Porphyrion, who we've talked about a whole bunch of times. It's the best 5 mana card, so you put it in your deck. And it's a control deck, so of course we have 2 copies of Demo, because they're super broken. And in a pinch, you could always metamorphosize your demos for more 8-drops. And then you've got your Healing Elites for your big beat stick. And if 10-12 is not enough damage for you to beat your opponent, you can always metamorphosize your Healing Elite to turn it into whatever 9-drop you want. So this seems like a very strong control deck. Generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of control decks in this meta, except for Control Magic, simply because they have so much AoE. They don't really care about Ward because they can just do things so many times. If you are into Magic, if you don't want to break the rules with Dralamir, then a Control Magic deck like this could be a great choice for you. And last, and probably least, we've got Death. It's been a couple of weeks since we've even talked about Death, and it's been about 15 weeks since we talked about Zombie Death. And despite the fact that we are going over Zombie Death this week, Board Wipe Death is probably still Death's best archetype. However, Death is not very popular. The Zombie archetype has been buffed pretty substantially in the core set refresh. So, if you really, really want to play Death this weekend, although I don't recommend it, a zombie deck like this could be fun. And I'm not trying to say that this deck is bad. This is a good deck. I wasn't going to talk about Death at all, and then I saw this list, and I thought this is pretty nice. So let's go over some of the newly changed cards. First and foremost, we got the Void Banshee, which is still a 2-mana 4/3. However, its effect is now simply Roar, deal 4 damage to your god. That is substantially better than its old effect. Before, it had an Afterlife, deal 4 damage to your god, and it would put the top card of your deck into your Void. Afterlife being the 4 damage was way worse, because when you would bring it back from the Void, whether it's from an opposing Pyramid Warden, or from some sort of Void manipulation thing that Death can do, the Afterlife would come back to bite you. Now, it's just a 2-mana creature with upside. It's super strong, big buff. We've also got the Wicked Fae in here, who is now a 2-mana 2/2, with Roar, destroy an enemy creature with 1 health, and summon an Impling. So, if you can get its effect to resolve, you have a 2-mana 3/3, and remove a creature, which is very high in tempo. Let's see, we got the Fickle Cambion, who has been changed a little bit. It no longer cares about your god healing, it simply cares about your god taking damage, and whenever you do take damage, the Fickle Cambion gets +1/+1. Death is very capable of dealing damage to itself, whether it's with its Soul and God Power or with many of its self-damaging cards. The next modified card, which probably is the most impactful, is Ray of Destruction. This is a 5-mana card. It says destroy a creature. Just destroy a creature and then deal 2 damage to both gods. That is really amazing. 5-mana hard removal is very rare in Gods Unchained. It's probably the only 5-mana hard removal card. And dealing 2 damage to both gods is only positive for you. Like, this is a zombie deck, so you have lots and lots of leech, so healing back that 2 damage will be incredibly easy. And then the 2 damage you deal to your opponent is, obviously good for killing them, but it's also great for activating Frenzy. So Ray of Destruction is a card that I think is just sort of pushing this archetype to the next level. It may not be the flashiest card, and it may not say zombie anywhere on it, but this is an amazing control spell. And that is it for the core set refresh buffed cards. Let's get into the main game plan of Zombie Death. It's very simple. You got your Cursed Obelisk, you got your Necroceptor. Both these cards can generate infinite zombies. If somehow you've been living under a rock and you are unaware, Cursed Obelisk is a 3-mana 1/4 with backline. It cannot attack ever. At the end of your turn, you summon a 1/1 zombie with Leech, and if you're frenzied, which you can be for at most 1 mana, you summon 2 1/1 zombies, which is great. Then you got the Necroceptor, your other infinite zombie generator. At the end of your turn, just like the Obelisk, you summon a 1/1 zombie with Leech, but if you're frenzied, you give that zombie +1/+1, making it a 2/2 zombie. And it doesn't stop there. After a zombie enters your void, your opponent loses 2 favor. So it's really important for your opponent to get relic removal, oftentimes from the Sanctum, to get rid of your Necroceptor, and the Necroceptor is actively stopping them from doing so. And then an extra fun interaction with the Necroceptor is if you have the Cursed Obelisk and the Scepter on the board, you're generating 3 zombie bodies a turn. If for any reason some of those, your board is too full to generate all the zombies, your opponent will lose 2 favor for each zombie you don't generate. So that is always fun. But Cursed Obelisk is the main card in the zombie archetypes. Not only does it make 2 creatures, which gets you twice as much favor as 1 creature, but you can bring back the Cursed Obelisk in a multitude of different ways. This in particular deck list only has Vampiric Skull to bring back his Cursed Obelisks, but that should be enough. So he essentially has 4 copies of Cursed Obelisk in here. But if you wanted to, you could put in, Pull the Strings, you can put in Raise Deads, you can put in the Half-Life. There are a multitude of ways to bring back Cursed Obelisk, and this is the main gimmick of your deck. Let's see, and then as far as win condition cards are concerned, we have the Overseer of Vitality, who was buffed a few patches ago, relatively recently. It is a 7-mana 6/6 with Roar. Give -2 health to each of your enemy creatures, and +2 strength to each of your creatures. So, that's obviously really great as like an AoE removal card. It's also important to note that that goes through Protected. So this is a 7-mana creature that can destroy a Zealous March just on curve. Very powerful. Super valuable in this current meta. Let's see, and then in the neutral slots, got the Axe Woman, because it's great. Wild Hog, because he's got stats. And then the Guild Enforcer, just like we talked about in the Deception deck analysis, Guild Enforcer is really good at dealing with light. And Zombie Death in general is known for being bad against light, because their main gimmick is Cursed Obelisk, which can be Light's Levied. However, your light opponent can only run 2 Light's Levies, and you can have 4 Cursed Obeli. So that's quite good. We talked about the Overseer of Vitality being able to deal with a Zealous March. The Guild Enforcer, of course, being very hard for light to deal with. So, despite the fact that Death is very unpopular, and despite the fact that zombie decks have been on the fringe of playability for a long time, this list looks like it can really hang in the current meta. And if you're willing to risk it with Death, this could be fun. I think this could be successful. And yeah, that's about it. So now it is conclusion time. We've done all the thinking. We've looked at all the best decks. What should we play this weekend for the max performance? Well, the answer is simple. It's Light. Light is the best god currently. They have not been nerfed over this past week, so they're going to continue to be the best god. Light is just really good at playing creatures all throughout the game and then capitalizing on it. So if you've got the Light cards to make a Light deck anywhere close to this one, you will do very, very well. That being said, I think Aggressive Deception is very good, and then of course there's this Zombie Death deck that just seems like it gets better and better against Light the more you think about it. But if you just want to keep it simple, Light is the way to go. But whatever deck you go with, make sure you have fun. Tell us how you did in the TST Discord, and have a wonderful day. Hey, you! Did you know that subscribing to the TST YouTube channel will increase your win rate by 6.9%? So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And while you're at it, equip Scythe of the Harvest and attack the like button directly in the face. Bye-bye!